and thank you for joining us for a discussion where we'll explore cybersecurity for the public sector. Indeed, security is top of mind for public institutions and organizations, which have become prime targets for cyber criminals and cyber terrorists. Governments, military and security institutions and installations, public health, financial and tax services all handle highly valuable, sensitive data. That, unfortunately, makes them vulnerable to extortion, sabotage, espionage, and the threat that all the information they hold could be sold and end up on the dark web or cybercrime networks. At the same time, public organizations and institutions are under increasing pressure to become data-driven, using information and technology to operate optimally, provide better services to citizens and to governments, ensure the proper functioning of critical infrastructure, and secure military operations. To top it all off, there is also new regulations, of course, and that puts more pressure on cybersecurity and compliance departments. While technologies like generative AI enable more sophisticated threats, making it harder to find personnel with the right skills to protect institutions. So that's a lot to discuss with our experts from Elastic, Devin Kerr, Director of ElasticSec Labs, and John Harmond, Vice President of Sales Cyber Solutions. Welcome to both of you.
Hello, everybody.
Howdy.
Thanks for joining us. Now, together, we are going to discuss how to address the challenges and obstacles of cybersecurity and cyber resilience for public institutions in this new era of AI. And we are going to demonstrate, hopefully, how Elastic's technology can help these institutions face this perfect storm. So I mentioned in my introduction that cybersecurity has become one of the most important aspects for organizations and private companies in recent years. But public organizations indeed are not immune. In fact, quite the opposite, because their data, like I mentioned, is highly valuable and highly coveted by cyber criminals. So first of all, can you tell us a bit more about the difference in terms of threat between private and public institutions?
Yeah, I can take that one. So honestly, too, I think a long time ago, people would have said, "Oh, it's very different because most governments are completely disconnected and they're targeted by kind of foreign adversaries and everything else." But really, we're all in one big connected internet now, right? Now, of course, there are intelligence agencies and other parts of defense organizations within various governments that do have kind of classified networks and disconnected networks, but in general, we all do commerce on the internet, right? And we're all accessible via the internet, whether that be through email, through some kind of chatting, right? So we can be targeted no matter who we are, and we saw that happen, very specifically with the Salt Typhoon attack that happened about a year ago, where the U.S. telephony networks were targeted specifically to target totally unclassified telephony devices for government officials over here. So it's something a little bit different, and lots of the sophistication we see of public sector, the budget and the number of people that are available is obviously much larger than I think a mom and pop shop or some like local business, no matter where you are in the world. But we all kind of face the same kind of challenges of being targeted. I mean, we see even like mom and pop shops being targeted just for financial data. Like if you were to want to build a salon in some other foreign country, what's the best way to do that? Go steal it from successful businesses in the States or in other countries in Europe, right? Go steal their data and jumpstart your business. So what we've seen is we as an industry, we are I think we've progressed, we've gotten more sophisticated, but so is the adversary.
My instinct is to say that there are intelligence-related discoveries that support this. My own perspective, is really based on the orgs that I worked with. But when we look at the trend in how adversaries think about espionage actors, targeting specific intellectual property types of technologies, we saw them pivot. Maybe 10 years ago, looking at personal information, looking at information that was held in public sector organizations. That was a big shift But since that time, I think we've seen these adversaries co-resonant. And I think to John's point, we see a lot of different classes of threats that are pretty indiscriminate in who they target. Those are going to hit a public sector organization in a very similar way as, say, like a private sector org. But maybe because the funding is different, the source of governance is a little bit different. I think that drastically shapes the outcomes for those kind of orgs.
Elastic publishes a yearly survey of cyber threats, cyber risks. I was wondering if you could maybe share the key insights from the latest one and tell us how the cybersecurity landscape has evolved in recent years and what are the most important challenges we face today. And I think it's important to point out that when we talk about cyber crime, it can take on many different forms.
Well, I think I can handle this one. The annual Global Threat Report is really a distillation of all of the visibility Elastic has of the threat landscape, which allows us to infer things like threat trends, to make recommendations, and to help folks strategize. The biggest thing that we've seen is really adversaries continuing to double down on defense evasions. And what I mean is they are using techniques and capabilities that allow them to essentially bypass security controls. We see this with techniques like bring your own vulnerable driver, which impacts the Windows operating system and allows an adversary to essentially uninstall security tools. We saw a 30% increase year over year in this phenomenon. And I think the part that's interesting about it is actually the reason. A lot of folks might look at this phenomenon and say, well, the adversaries are gaining momentum, they're winning. But I don't think that's really the whole story. They are reacting to the improvements in security technologies that already exist, that organizations have already implemented. So security has been working, and now adversaries are pushing back. And this, I think, is going to represent a new dynamic going into the future for folks that are trying to strategize around attack defense dynamics.
And going back to the variety of threats, you mentioned adversary. I was wondering if you could maybe explain what you mean by that and the different type of threats faced by organizations. We've got different types of malware. We've got ransomware, extortion, sabotage, espionage. I mentioned it in my introduction.
Yes, there really, I think, is quite a lot of different categories of risk that folks have to worry about. From the very low level, like indiscriminate threats that take advantage of their employees and succeed at social engineering them to self-infect. That is a story that we all know. It is very well established, and I think too there's technologies that help de-risk that situation. But there's also things that I think are a little bit more abstract. We see adversaries targeting personal information, not because they want to sell that personal information, but because it makes things like automated password recovery attempts easier. And when we think about the rise of threat phenomenon like access brokers, essentially middlemen in the criminal networks that steal credentials and then resell them to threat actors, this phenomenon has made it a lot easier for adversaries of all kinds, from the unskilled to the nation state, to successfully gain access to environments. And what that really means is you can no longer ignore what might be considered indiscriminate, globally prevalent botnet type malware, because that could just be the first way that a more sophisticated, targeted, and deliberate actor gets in.
Yeah, we also saw the post COVID, everybody had to go home, right? I don't care if you're biggest intelligence agency in the world, everybody was at home, right? Even adversaries were at home also. So they had to figure out they had to kind of operate in this new kind of paradigm of like, how do I do human based intelligence, or how do I do collection on our targets that were all just sitting in front of a computer, right? And so we saw a lot of that happen. And I think we've seen this kind of upsurgence of like I would get them all the time here of like a text message that, oh, this is from your CEO, or this is from your boss, or or this is a toll that you didn't pay, and here's a link to pay money on, right? But I get calls as I'm sure Devin does too, as the resident cybersecurity person in my friends and family. I'm the cybersecurity tech support, right? So I get the phone calls all the time from friends and family being like, oh, I just got this got leaked, or my bank account got hacked. How do I do it, right? So it impacts everybody, and then that impacts the adversaries have really gotten it's almost like they've gotten less sophisticated because they didn't have to be, as like, they don't have to have these. It was always like a long time ago, not a long time, a couple of years ago, it was all about exploits. Everything was being exploited, right? Browsers and, everything there. And we're such a connected society all over the place that it is easy to gain access to you no matter where you are, right? Everybody has a phone. Everybody's data has been leaked or breached, multiple times over. Getting access to your data costs either nothing or, literally pennies, right? To, kind of get access to your data. So it can be used to target, you as a CEO, as a, director in a public organization, or being a regular consumer. And, we've seen adversaries kind of move that way holistically for lots of different things. So it's, that's one of the, as on the defender side, it's kind of one of the fun things about it is it's a ever-changing kind of dynamic, but it also means that we can't just rely on the old ways of stopping adversaries 100% always working. But I like to say too, it's really about the data, right? If we have the data, we have all the collection of what kind of happens, all the telemetry that happens in our organization, we at least have that to go back and look, hey, did we see this happen, right? We all, between the SolarWinds breach and Log4j and all these other things that kind of happen, even the Sol Typhoon, that the telephony breach, even in that time, they didn't have enough data. They literally couldn't, a lot of the phone organizations, these are some of the largest companies in America, didn't have the data to say, do we know we clean this up, right? They literally not enough telemetry, right? And it's because it's partially a problem of it's expensive to hold a lot of this data. So it's on us as an industry of how do we, and I think we've done a good job of doing this at Elastic, of how do we help enable customers to store long-term telemetry, make it affordable, and keep it actionable.
Yeah, low-cost data proliferation. It might sound like a bad thing, but making it economical to retain data is one of the best strategic things that an enterprise can do.
Especially in PubSec, where there's, they have to. And in the US, I'm sure it's happening in other places in the world. We have executive orders that have come out and said that 2131 is the big one here, or that's requiring agencies in the US government to store data for 12 months hot. The definitions are very vague, and then 18 months cold. That was unaffordable. That would in some other other ways of storing telemetry, that would be like your entire IT budget just for logging the data to be compliant, right? So as an industry, we all had to kind of figure out how do we do this affordably. And again, I think the biggest thing is it has to be actionable, right? If customers can't, they're not, the FBI, NSA, whatever your local, law enforcement or intelligence agency comes to you as an agency and says, hey, we saw this foreign adversary, this TTP, this tactic being run in your network, and it can't be okay, let me run a question, run this to see if I've seen it ever, and it's not go get my cup of coffee, come back and have an answer. It's a run it Friday night, pray to God I don't knock over, my cluster of all my data, or I just never get a result back. That's unacceptable, right? And so we have to have a solution to do that.
John, I feel like you're talking about me. I've been in that seat so many times, but I also think that there have been so many cases, so many investigations that I ran where you could only look back 6 months or 8 months or 14 months, and even that inferred that there was an older timeline of activity. There was more you didn't know. And unfortunately, it's those things that you don't know, those uncertainties, that impact how you make changes to prevent them. And so for organizations that don't have data, it does, I think, become a very serious problem. They're always probably playing whack-a-mole, and we see this phenomenon all the time. A system becomes infected, they throw resources at it indiscriminately, they clean it up, but they may have overlooked other systems that maybe were more critical. This is part of, I think, a lot of organizations' maturity journey as they become more familiar with these operational cycles. They will improve that and they will get more efficient. But if you're just starting out and you haven't had many chances to really test that protocol, unfortunately, it can lead to some really terrible outcomes.
I was actually going to ask you about that, Devin, the level of maturity within the public sector that allows companies to go back, to store sufficient data so they can, trace incidents back to their initial source if possible.
I think I've been really fortunate to work with probably some of the most mature organizations in the world who retain years of data and have very robust teams. And I think if you look at it through that lens, it might feel as though all enterprises are equally prepared. Unfortunately, that's really not the case. Some regions of the world, they might have a bias towards detection, but not detection and response. They might federate those roles to different teams. And so the tools themselves might be wholly different. It makes it really hard to transition from discovering a threat to remediating that threat. And all of the metrics that we might look at, those I would expect to trend into longer periods of time. What I tend to think of as increased latency. Increased latency just leads to bad outcomes. So organizations that don't have the ability to kind of reduce that, I think that function is maybe even more important than the technology itself. Western organizations I've worked with have been phenomenal. And I've worked with most of the Five Eyes, and again, very strong teams, well staffed, very thorough. But if you look at, say, a defense oriented entity versus, say, like civilian federal, those will also generally be really different. At least in the United States, that's true. I would expect in other countries that to be true as well.
Yeah, and there's kind of like, and it's a totally cliche thing to say now of like, there aren't enough people in cybersecurity, right? It's like, well, yeah, I don't think there ever will be, right? There never will be. But it's because it's one of those things that's it's not necessarily a profit center for any, no matter if you're a commercial organization or whether it's just a cost center. Like having a big enough team, it costs a lot of money, a lot of time to do it. But it's also on us as the vendor community to create tools and have platforms that teams can use. And there's I think the disparity typically is it's that the bell curve, right, where there is a ton. I call them the ninjas. They're like the super high speed folks. I work a lot with U.S. military and all this stuff. There are some fantastic people that are they're young, they're energetic, and they are just hot. They know what they're doing. They got it going. But they also have a lot of people they bring in that are literally in high school. The average age of my customer is 18 to 24 years old, right? And so that is can be a big disparity. I mean, there's a big difference between some kid coming out of literally high school here in the States that's 18 years old. With not whole not experience doesn't mean they're not passionate about what they're doing. They don't have the background or haven't had access to tooling that big enterprises can use, right? And so it's on us to develop tools that are not just for the experts of how do we have that bell curve of like how do we build tools and that capability to do that. Now, I would say as a very typical cybersecurity person, we're generally prickly and very we kind of blow things off of like, oh, that's not really like, who cares about that stuff. I would say I would be very much with that when it comes to AI of, okay, this besides fun parlor tricks of asking it silly questions and getting answers, things you can do with ChatGPT, right? What else can we make it do, right? And one of the things that like Devin's team and our engineering team, I've been kind of blown away by. And I like to say, really, the biggest thing with AI, and no matter what vendor you're working with, AI can't just be basically a chat GPT clone. That's kind of like table stakes. That's the way it's got to be, right? It's really about how do we leverage this, really, I'm mind blown by what we're able to do. It has to be, how do we have quality of life improvement? How do we leverage AI for quality of life improvement for our users, right? So how do we leverage it? And it's really good at sending in a ton of data and say, hey, understand this for me, right? Or like, basically do a little bit of my job so that I can do a lot more with less people. And that's really where kind of the nexus point of where AI is going to help the most sophisticated teams and some of the least sophisticated teams, because the machine can do some of the work for you, right? And it still needs a human in the loop. We still have to have, some more experienced people to kind of make decisions on it, because, it makes mistakes and it does things like that. But humans make mistakes all the time, right? And so it's really about how can we leverage this technology to improve the quality of life for our customers.
But John, Devin, before you follow up, an important point here. Before leveraging the power of Gen AI or AI and new types of technologies and automation, prior to doing that, you've got to open up your data and make it interoperable as well. You've got to basically be able to have an exchange somehow and make it secure. And
Right.
that can be a challenge, of course, especially in the public sector.
Yeah. Then I'll let you answer in a second. Just follow up with the answer. Really, when I talk about what we build, we're a data platform, right? Elastic built a data platform that we can do, our logging. You can do what I call mission search or security, right? That's our whole platform. The days of siloing your data where you have data all over the place and you're paying. My favorite question in the world, I love asking this question to CIOs and CISOs because I always get a huge reaction out of them, is how many times are you paying for one piece of telemetry, right? And they're like, oh, I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5 different times, right? And that's just the cost. Not even talking about how are you securing it, how are you doing access management to all that data? Because we had this explosion of data that's happened, and needing the data to actually pursue sophisticated adversaries. You have to have a common data platform. They call it kind of data mesh, that the data just kind of like operates in your enterprise environment, and then you can use it however you need. If you need it for IT, needs it for logging or for making sure systems up and running. Security obviously needs it for identifying threats. It's all the same kind of thing, and paying for it multiple times it's not cost effective. And I don't care where you are in the world right now. Nobody has infinite amount of money, and we all need to be more cognizant of of our budgets and what we're spending on, right? So it's just super important. Devin, you want to follow up on the AI side too?
Yeah, well, I think there's a dynamic at play here that maybe a lot of folks underestimate. You get a lot more out of these AI models when you bring in unique data from your organization, things that are representative of you, but maybe not of another entity like yours, because you've got a unique makeup of people and you've got a unique mission. All of those things shape this. But you're collecting this data and you're exposing it to a system which adversaries will have a tremendous amount of interest in, because now there's a one-stop shop where they can go find all of that interesting data that they also care about. And there's less to discover about them if they can get to that place the shortest path possible. But the upside, and I think this is the reason that we will see people continue to take that risk and continue to invest in data segmentation and controls, is because an informed agentic system is a force multiplier. Think about it not as a tool, but as like a very reliable member of your team.
Mm-hmm.
When you onboard that team member, yes, you're taking risks. And I would say that that's very similar to when you're hiring. But when you're onboarding that team member, they are bringing essentially the ability to not sleep, to not eat, to take direction, to remember, to have institutional knowledge that they preserve. And that will also improve that capability over time. So while it may not get more secure over time, it certainly will get more capable. And I think, again, we'll see enterprises double down on bringing their data together so that they can benefit from it.
Now, I just wanted to go back to what you mentioned earlier, John, and it's the level of maturity of the skills required to handle data, AI, and therefore cybersecurity, because I think they all go hand in hand, really. I think it's pretty obvious to most people that in the private sector, there's a lot of training provided, etc., but maybe not so much in the public sector where budgets are normally a bit tighter. So generally, when you work with clients from that sector, what's your assessment in terms of skills or the upskilling required to be able to reinforce cybersecurity? Or is it possible with the right tools to make sure that there isn't too much training and upskilling required?
Yeah, I mean, you can't software tool your way out of kind of fundamentals, right? I mean, they have to have some kind of base fundamentals. Most of that stuff's super available online. And the impressive thing that I've seen, it's kind of next generation kind of coming up and going into young service members that we see, they're native with some of this kind of stuff now. I mean, they're definitely internet native, they're definitely mobile native, and they can pick up on a lot of these things really pretty quickly. they might not necessarily know like some of the lower level fundamentals, but I would say lots of times it's not, you don't necessarily need that to be, just to get things going. I think lots of times too, we're, as a industry in cyber, we're a little too inclusive sometimes of like, oh well, it's a little more thumb your nose up at, just because we're, you have to be, you don't know as much as I do kind of thing, right? Where it's like, I really think that this kind of work, especially with the way AI is kind of, and we're still in the really early days of what AI is going to be able to do, and that's the agentic way of having like agents that are literally kind of acting as employees. Devin, I love and talk about all the time because I think it's that's the death of the future of where this is going. But it's one of the cool things I do that I think at least in the U.S. that we do is there generally is a lot of less experienced people because it's a great job to go into as a first job. It was my first job, coming into the U.S. government. I interned with the military kind of through like high school and through college, but my first real job was kind of working in the government, and it's I got tons of training from there. So I tell people when I talk to young people about it, I say go work in the government. It's an awesome job. It's you get access to all kinds of cool stuff. You get lots of training for it, and that's honestly I do really kind of see as the government can be this kind of like almost like work program that helps get cyber people out in the industry. I mean, a lot of us come out of that world, and we got all of our training, on that. But the way that cyber is kind of working, a lot of these things are, this is kind of like the new real job. There's just where people can come in, the tools can help them. As long as my biggest thing is when I'm hiring people, I like to think about is the person have that kind of passion for it, right? When they're kind of looking through the data, or they have that veracity of like, oh, I'm gonna go find this, right, and just go kind of hunting and pecking through it. Do they do they kind of do that? Do they not kind of let down? That is kind of what we need to hire kind of more of in kind of cyber. And there are lots of trainings that are out there. I think most organizations in public sector do a really good job of training their people and having training budgets and all that kind of stuff. Um, but it's something that, like I said before, we're never not going to have enough people, right? It's impossible. We could probably hire every person in the world to do cybersecurity and still not have enough people. It's really about how can we, and this is, I think it's on us as the industry, is we can't build our tools for just the highest end user. It's got to be something that's usable. And I really think AI is one of those things that can really help with that.
But what you're describing here, John, is possibly this shift towards creating a cybersecurity culture. I remember in the early days of digitalization, we had a chief digital officer. We still have some in some companies, I guess. But now it's all part of the culture, I'd say, generally of the organization. And isn't the same going to happen or already happening in the private sector and in this, in the public sector too?
Yeah, I think it is just because cybersecurity impacts all of us, right? Like I have two teenage girls, right, and they know, like they've had their Roblox account hacked, and they know, like they're these kind of digital natives that literally have grown up, were practically born with iPads and stuff in their hands. They have a better understanding of it than a lot of other generations do. But the biggest thing for a lot of them is understanding what you're putting out there, right? For data of like, I think we all kind of understand cybersecurity in general. I think it's actually a pretty well understood thing from a lot of different people, like general parts of it. But it's also understanding of like sometimes the problem is that it's always somebody else that's happening to, not necessarily yourself. So I think if as a even culture, if we look a little more inward as to like, okay, when I'm about to put this, whatever, tweet or put something out there on the internet, of like just taking a second, looking at your browser and be like, okay, like, is this real? Or what am I? This text that I got saying I owe a toll bill, not of not just consuming, of really taking a little bit of critical thinking about it. I think we're set up to really have really great workforce of people. It's just a matter of, can we keep up with the data, and as an industry, can we build tools that really help everybody, not just one set of teams.
I just wanted to go back to your offering at Elastic and how you are helping public sector institutions face the rising threat of cybersecurity or cybercrime. Because, as you mentioned, Elastic has gained a great reputation. It's very well known for its search technology, but it's not always very clear necessarily in people's mind what it can do in terms of cybersecurity. And I just wanted maybe you two to tell us more about that.
Yeah, sure. So I have to say, for a lot of people think they know Elastic. They're like, oh, I played with Elastic, 5 years ago. I built a simple website or something like that. And I like to tell those folks, this is not your father's Elastic. We are a different company than we ever have been. Search and our free and open platform, kind of powers everything, because search is one of those things that literally everybody does every single day. I've probably searched 10 times, probably more than that, 20, 50 times a day on different things. But for us, again, it's about being like a data platform, right? That you have to do search on. And for us, it's about logging, being able to do like submission search, whatever that mission that your agency might be. If you need search, you can use our platform. And for security, it's SIEM. Both Devin and I came from endpoint company Endgame that Elastic purchased back in 2019. That we offer a free endpoint now. So one of those commoditized things that's happening for a lot of customers is they have to spend money on some of these other endpoint vendors. And our whole thing is like, why, right? Like, it's really about the data. We can have most of that stuff's commoditized when it comes to protecting kind of the endpoint. It's really about how do we collect the telemetry off of Windows, Linux, Mac, and cloud kind of environments. How do we bring that in, do it affordably, and help you action it? But again, the power of Elastic is everything I just mentioned, from logging, search, and security. It's all the same software, right? So we're literally one SKU company. When you purchase Elastic, you're getting everything that I talked about here today, whether it be to run everything on your endpoint, to a SIEM, security analytics platform, to all of our AI capabilities. In fact, for our public sector customers, on day zero, if you install our software today, you have AI, even if you're a complete disconnected customer. So if you're in a disconnected network, if you have access to, they brought in Llama, or you have Minstrel or one of these other kind of disconnected LLMs, you have AI today, right? I have several customers that are disconnected. And we call it kind of the DIL world, the disconnected, intermittent, and latent kinds of customers. These are customers that are either forward deployed and they're in the desert someplace or in a jungle, wherever it might be, or they're just in a complete classified kind of network. You have, using Elastic, you have AI capabilities today, as long as you have that LLM kind of be pointed to. But again, it's all one thing of software, and that's how we really think it's going to work. How it needs to work is your logging and security platform. It's the same. It's all the same data, right? Again, why are you paying for the same bit of telemetry 2, 3, 4, 5 different times? Having one common data mesh that lives in your enterprise, and then be able to use it for IT, use it for security, use it for whatever your mission might be for your agency. And then on the security side, being powered by our Elastic Security Labs team, you automatically get our detections out of the box. This is not another thing you got to pay for. All the work that Devin's team does when it comes to researching threats, it just comes with our software, right? Devin, you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to offer another thing that we developed specifically because of public sector orgs that we knew would be disconnected, really is a reflection of that Elastic Security Labs research work. Most of our work is done in real time, which means if my team discovers a thing today, you will probably hear about it tomorrow, and there will be product features that are designed to detect and mitigate that threat. But for a disconnected on-premises user who's maintaining their own updates, they will not benefit from those updates. So what we've done is we've actually incorporated all of our research in the AI assistant so that those disconnected customers on a per release basis get those updates. They are not omitting the first party intelligence. They're just getting it on maybe a more controlled schedule, and they can choose to do manual updates to include those things. We've actually worked with a number of different governments around the world to make that a much more seamless process. Again, just because they may not have folks with our technical expertise available at all times.
Yeah. One thing I also mentioned too, when it comes down to where you can run our software, we run in the cloud. We have a SaaS offering, and for our US customers, we have a FedRAMP offering here. We run in every classified network across the world. You can run us in the cloud. You can run us on-prem. And the really cool thing is too, in that kind of data mesh concept I talked about before, we have this technology called cross-cluster search. It's a lot of words. But basically what it means is you can collect your data, no matter where it is. So if you're, say, you're an agency that has you're in multiple cities, or other maybe parts across the world, you have several customers that literally operate their data mesh across the world, where you can collect your data wherever that is, kind of locally. Say it's the eastern part of the country and the western part of the country. You can collect that data kind of locally there, not to pay for it again, not to pay the transfer cost of moving data around in the cloud. And then we want to search that data. You just search the mesh. You don't even care as a user. They don't care where it's being hosted. They just care, can I access the data that I need? And so you can configure our software so that you can operate on this mesh and not care about where your data is being hosted. And of course, this all can be under RBAC controlled, and ABAC have a control on it, the data, getting access to the people that only need access to it. But again, being able to operate on your data no matter where it is, and again, doing cost effectively is the most important thing.
And are you able to share some interesting case studies with us and successful examples of collaborations with public sector organizations?
Yeah, I can give you I gave a couple quick, and I'll just kind of double down on them. I'm not going to necessarily use names, but we work with some of the largest organizations in the U.S. government. Again, some of these entities have millions of endpoints, across their enterprise. We're collecting telemetry literally across the world. And that's one of our things. And another we mentioned the DIL world again. If you are a customer that has requirements that work in disconnected world, or the classified world, we are the solution, right? A lot of other companies have really doubled down on just being cloud based, and of course, we have that also. But having a vendor that does think about how would our customers operate when they're in these disconnected environments isn't very common, right? And so we're super popular in those kinds of environments and very successful across those environments also.
Okay, time to wrap up, I guess. Any final thoughts, final words? How can public sector organizations best defend themselves in light of rising cybersecurity threats?
I mean, I'll go. I think that one of the most important things is just to realize that nobody's in it alone, right? We often think about challenges in terms of us versus them. It's us versus the adversary, but really it's a little bit more extreme than that. All defenders are kind of aligned against all adversaries. And organizations like Elastic, we share our knowledge and resources so that we can help all those defenders with all the various adversaries that they're addressing. Use those resources, use the knowledge to get better, use the capabilities to get better. Open source is I think a really important part of Elastic's DNA. We always want to be transparent. And I think, part of that is about our mission to humanity, to ensure that all people everywhere are protected. It's a big challenge. But I think if there are public sector orgs that need help, there's probably not a better collaborator than us.
No, 100% agree. Operating kind of in the open, not being a black box, which is kind of part of our ethos of not just hey, trust me, this works. Don't need to look under the covers or look under the black box. It just works. Everything we do kind of is in the open. Devin's team does a great job too of doing all the research that we publish and putting out there. And the flexibility of the way Elastic works, it literally can work in any environment, no matter where we're not going to necessarily pigeonhole you into the way it goes. That's really kind of what you should be expecting as a customer of I need you to operate as a vendor. I want your software to operate in my environment, not kind of force me into something that, that you want me to do as a kind of a vendor. That's definitely kind of one thing I like to have. And also too, just the amount of capabilities you pump out too is, super impressive. So really appreciate everybody's time today, and looking forward to speaking to some of y'all.
Fantastic. And if people want to get in touch and find out more about your offerings and services?
Yeah, you can go to elastic.co is for our website. Kind of go from there. We also have a connect, that's in there. You go through that, and then they can make sure that your correct sales team. We're a worldwide team. We have teams all over the world. No matter where you are, what geo you're in, we have somebody there that's local or fairly local that can help you out.
Okay, so to sum up, the best defense is to be collaborative, innovative, and humble, John, based on what you said.
Yeah,
And of course, use Elastic.
That's 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
Always a good idea to be humble when it comes to digitalization, AI, and cybersecurity threats, of course. Well, John Harmon and Devon Kerr, thank you so much for your insights today. Very helpful conversation.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you.
Many thanks to both of you, and thanks to you, of course, for watching. To find out more, well, look at the Elastic website, of course. Thank you for joining us and for watching.